And welcome back to Capitol Tonight. So in just 4 days, registered Democrats and Republicans across the state will be heading to the polls, albeit in what is expected to be very low numbers, to determine who their candidates will be on the general election ballot in November. And who better to preview these races than the journalists who have been covering all of these campaigns this summer. They are our reporters of the Roundtable, and joining us from New York City this evening is Albany Times Union reporter and blogger Jimmy Vielkind. Back here with me in the studio are James Medore, the Albany bureau chief for Newsday, and Michael Gormley, the Capitol editor for the Associated Press. Welcome all.
Good to be here.
Nice to see you, especially you, Medore. We haven't seen you at all. It's lovely.
Nice to be here. I'm back from vacation.
Good. It's lovely to have you back. So I'd like to start with you, Michael.
Sure, Liz.
Because you have a very interesting story, which is sort of not a surprise to anyone who's watching, but a real disappointment to some people.
Right. With Democratic Attorney General Andrew Cuomo, who is the front runner for the governor's position, today made it official and said that he was not going to endorse anyone in the Attorney General's race. We've got some great candidates there. The Democrats have some great candidates. They were all hoping at some point to have gotten Andrew Cuomo's support, which could have been critical for a race where you've got 5 people who aren't really moving. No one's breaking out of the pack. Now, the difference was that everyone except Andrew Cuomo's staff people on the record were saying that he made no choice, although everyone thought months ago that Kathleen Rice was his choice. They've denied that publicly for months now. So coming out today and saying he's not going to endorse it, he's going to stay neutral, is a blow to Kathleen Rice, but it also comes at a time when Eric Schneiderman, the state senator, is rising. He has the New York Times endorsement, which is key. And this gives Andrew Cuomo both the chance to step aside and say, I'm above this, I'm not going to get involved in politics, but it also keeps him from taking a loss if he were to go with Rice.
Exactly, yeah. I think it was a very shrewd political move, certainly not unsurprising for any of us who were watching, but also very interested because I think he sort of got boxed by the Schneiderman people. I mean, because of the momentum, and you're noting that there hasn't been a lot of momentum among these 5. There was supposed to be momentum by Kathleen Rice. You cover Long Island, that's her home turf. What was the response?
Her campaign is disappointed. When she entered this race many months ago, she thought that she would eventually win him over and that he would endorse her. Many people thought because she's a woman and she's from a suburban area that would help balance the Democratic ticket, which is heavily male and from New York City. However, as she progressed in her campaign, there were some missteps. Other people were doing better than expected. And it appeared as if her chances of getting Andrew Cuomo's endorsement lessened. Still today, some members of her campaign were very disappointed because they saw it as a chance to distinguish themselves from the other 4 candidates. Now they don't have that opportunity, and Eric Schneiderman clearly has momentum going for him.
Jimmy, I'd like to bring you in down in the city there. I mean, what is your thought about what's going on here, what happened today with Andrew Cuomo? Again, not a big surprise, but James mentioned missteps. Did you see missteps on the part of the Rice campaign?
Well, if you look at the editorials, the one repeated theme that kind of has come out is that she's underqualified, and this has been something that the New York Times mentioned when it lauded Senator Schneiderman. This is something that my paper, the Albany Times Union, mentioned when we also endorsed Senator Schneiderman for Attorney General. And so I think that there were misgivings, and initially Andrew Cuomo and his supporters, and in the small, kind of quiet and private ways, had been boosting Rice, but then there were lots of signs that he had reservations about boosting her. What has been reasonably clear and consistent throughout the campaign is that Cuomo doesn't want Schneiderman, and there are a couple of reasons for it. One is that he thinks that he's too liberal in the general election against Dan Donovan, the Staten Island district attorney, who's going to be the Republican candidate, and also that Schneiderman is a state senate, and as we know, in the eyes of Cuomo, who's running as a new Democrat and who's, you know, trying to distance himself from some of the current Democrats in Albany, that makes him a symbol of all that is unrighteous and evil. So
just to put it lightly, yeah, don't sugarcoat it, Jimmy.
Right.
Just put it right out there. That's great.
So I think that this is, as you said, an indication that Schneiderman's momentum and kind of the coalition that he had assembled, which includes powerful unions, it includes lots of progressive elected officials. He has done a lot to make sure he has a lot of validators in the African-American community. I think today he was endorsed by Russell Simmons, the hip-hop mogul who was key to helping roll back some of the Rockefeller-era drug laws. there wasn't much Cuomo could do. He couldn't go nuclear. He would have had to launch a nuclear strike at this point, and then even if he did, it's not clear whether that would have been enough to stop Schneiderman. And so the political risk was too high, and as you said, this didn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, it's interesting because, Mike Gormley, you mentioned this also. I mean, it would have been a blow to Cuomo had he endorsed someone at the last minute and then that person failed to take off. And when I said that I thought the Schneiderman campaign had boxed him in, they really did roll out all of these people. Jimmy mentions Russell Simmons. They worked together, Cuomo and Russell Simmons, very closely. Right. If I'm sure you recall, you were definitely around covering that.
We were chasing him with you.
We were indeed. We were sitting outside the governor's office waiting for him for 8 hours in a meeting.
But even more importantly, the people that you're mentioning are critical constituency for a Democratic primary. In defense, actually, just to let everyone know and the viewers, this isn't over yet. I mean, this is so close. That is another reason why. Andrew Cuomo may have been thinking, we don't know what's in his head, he may have been thinking this is too close to call. I can't pick someone else at this point, even though he sort of set the groundwork for being independent up to this point, because who knows who's going to win on Tuesday. In defense of Kathleen Rice, about the experience question, it's a tough job. Elliot Spitzer described the job as sort of being in charge of a big law firm. If voters were looking for someone experienced in a courtroom, Kathleen Rice probably has more than anyone, maybe all of them combined.
Right.
If we also look, too, at recent history, it's on Cuomo's side. Elliot Spitzer did not endorse any of the candidates in the Democratic primary in 2006, and if we go back to the early 1990s, Robert Abrams also was not active in the primary situation.
Right, but in the case of Elliot Spitzer and Andrew Cuomo, it was because Elliot Spitzer didn't want an aggressive, ambitious guy coming up behind him. Then there was no secret that Andrew Cuomo wanted to be governor, not because of all these things. I mean, I think that the real concern, actually, ironically, all of these people, with the exception of Rice, have said definitively that they don't have any desire to go on to be governor. She has sort of hedged slightly, although she says she has no plans to do that. It's interesting. We did have a report today that Cuomo and Schneiderman had a meeting. They had a meeting yesterday. It's being reported. Unclear what happened there. And
well, we know that Schneiderman, though, did sign on yesterday to Cuomo's
pledge. That's right.
Campaign platform. He waited until yesterday. You'll recall in the debate that you participated in earlier this week, Schneiderman hedged and said he was still thinking about it. He wasn't sure. Brodsky and Donalo said they wouldn't sign on, and of course Kathleen Rice and Sean Coffey did.
Now, and as most private meetings that we find out about and report about, they wanted to know that there was a private meeting.
Oh, yeah, leaked.
The image was important here. Also, I'm going back to 2006, and remember that Andrew Cuomo was one of the people who seemed to be most upset with Spitzer for not endorsing him at that time.
He was.
But we also had a situation where I'm trying to think in the debates, and we were all there. Elliot Spitzer, Tom Suozzi, did they say, going back further with Elliot Spitzer, I don't think he ever said when he was Attorney General, running for Attorney General, that he was going to run for other office. It was assumed. But,
in the final years, it was assumed.
But I think
right,
it's
you're
because
right.
of Elliot Spitzer and because of Andrew Cuomo. Now it's become AG, aspiring governor, right? That's the word for it.
It is.
So now it's become commonplace. Yes.
You brought up the issue of turnout, and I just want to bring Jimmy back in. Jimmy, you were down in the Bronx today. A fascinating race down there. It's all going to come down to turnout, and we are talking, of course, about Senator Pedro Espada, the Senate Majority Leader. What's going on down there on the ground?
Well, it was interesting. It was interesting. I was actually at a rally at Bronx Borough Hall where Espada was endorsed by Lenora Fulani, but also he was backed by about 24 clergy members and community activists and people who said they'd known Pedro Espada, who said, we don't want to rush to judgment. That is, the mainstream media reports on things like the fact that Espada is under investigation by state and federal and local prosecutors, that he owes thousands of dollars in campaign fines, that he is now facing littering fines, that he may or may not actually live in his district, that they know him, they know the good work that he's done in that district. And I asked one man, a pastor at the Green Pastures Baptist Church, which I later discovered is actually not in the district, but he said every Thanksgiving, Pedro shows up with at least 50 turkeys. I have to support him because he's always supported me. And it just made me realize that this is what it's going to come down to, that he's right, that for all these things that, and so it was interesting. I later went to Bill Samuels' office. Bill Samuels, the plastics magnate who was going to run for lieutenant governor and has started this entity called the New Roosevelt Initiative to try and knock Espada out of office. He's already spent about $200,000, a little more if you count the consultant fees. And I said, you know, Bill, is any of it going to work to overcome the turkeys? He said he didn't know. And so I really think it does come down to turnout. It comes down to what happens. And so all the forces have aligned against Espada. The Bronx County Democratic Party is not with him.
True.
Major labor unions are not with him. The Working Families Party has got at least 50 canvassers on the ground in the district knocking on doors. Spokesman for that party said they plan to hit 40,000 to 50,000 doors, and they're going to try to turn out the vote. But the larger metaphor here is, if Espada can't be ousted, Espada, who has become the poster child for kind of the dysfunction of the Senate and many of the problems of Albany, what signal does that send to voters, and what signal does that send about kind of the power of incumbency? And you know, do the people, you know, is it, at what point do kind of the good government groups that always say that hope springs eternal, you know, kind of have their wells run dry?
You know, though, here's the thing. I mean, it's not just turkeys, actually. It's fruits and vegetables. He's spent over $100,000 of his campaign cash giving out food, which, of course, means something to people, certainly, particularly if they're hungry. But it isn't a unilateral support for him, because he has the support of Democratic Conference leader John Sampson, who did a PSA and a public service announcement and an immigration forum with Pedro Espada, because even if he loses on Tuesday, Pedro Espada will be in the Senate until January, and these guys are coming back. Don't you think that's what's happening here?
I think it's a big part of it, and what Jimmy was running down, all the things we've been reporting and they're upset about. Of course, we're reporting them because they're true. The other thing, it all comes back to, again, Tip O'Neill.
All politics is local.
That's it. There's a danger of us in Albany of trying to look at these guys for half a year or whatever and trying to figure out what their support is at home. It's completely different. More than half the job is in those districts.
Sure.
For some, it's almost all of it. And Pedro Espada has, over the years, been loved in that district by a lot of people. There's the other factor, which is hard to write about, but when we all know him, he's an amazing person to meet. He is charismatic. He is very, very smart. And he's very engaging, and that's the sort of thing that works in retail politics.
Ironically, it's not even his district, technically. I'm sorry, he's also what?
He's also unflappable. That, as Mike said, all these charges happen to be true, and they happen to be, or excuse me, all the reports of the charges are true. We don't know if the charges are true. That'll be determined in court. And Espada doesn't bat an eyelash. He just says that they're without merit and that he's being unfairly singled out.
A political witch hunt by Andrew Cuomo, he says. But this district originally actually was Ruben Diaz's district, if I'm not mistaken, and now Ruben Diaz, the two of them have battled for years, and now they've made peace, and Ruben Diaz is his biggest supporter.
And it's interesting, too, many of your viewers have never met Pedro Espada. He doesn't represent where they live, and yet he is having an impact, because the people that do represent them are being attacked, both Democrats and Republicans, because, of course, Pedro Espada was one of the coup leaders, and Republicans endorsed him to be their leader during the coup, and then, of course, he goes back to the Democrats, and the Democrats make him majority leader. So on Long Island, Brian Foley is being tarred by Pedro Espada's problems. Up in Albany, Neil Breslin is dealing with the issue, and in Buffalo, Bill Stokowski is dealing with the issue. So in many ways, Pedro Espada is almost like a plague on both sides of the Senate, because they're all having to deal with his problems in their campaigns when they would prefer to be talking about what they're doing, not what he did.
Last word, Jimmy. Go ahead.
It's gotten so bad, James, that Senator Neil Breslin of the Albany area has been sending a mailer attacking Espada, saying that Breslin stood up to Espada and specifically attacking Espada and disassociating himself from Espada, hoping that in his own primary challenge against Luke Martland, he'll get a boost.
I also think that if you're looking at the Senate for who's tainted or who's connected to Espada, I think everyone in that Senate at some point voted for him.
Yes, at
you know,
some
he started
point,
the coup and then had to change it. Yes, right.
We are unfortunately out of time. We didn't even really get to talk about the Republicans, but we will definitely get to them. So thank you very much, Mike Gormley, for joining me. Also, thank you, James Medore. And Jimmy down in New York City. We'll be seeing you soon. Thanks very much and take care.